Hey, I make $0 from YouTube for these videos because otherwise they're taken down instantly, so if you want me to continue making these weekly, check out my Patreon if you want. This is Suede's Pokemon Journey. Episode 2, Pokemon Emergency. Man, there is a lot of stuff going on in this episode. Honestly, it feels like someone took 2 or even 3 episodes and then just squished and squeezed it until it was able to fit into the Play-Doh pot of standard runtime. If anything, it almost feels like a clip show, or more accurately, like an anthology of teeny short episodes, like 22 short films about Springfield, as the stories are all interconnected around a single main narrative of Ash getting his Pikachu out of critical condition. There are story points about Ash, of course, and his responsibilities as a Pokemon trainer, but there are also meaty tidbits dropped about Professor Oak, Ash's parents, Misty, Misty's bike, Jenny herself, Nurse Joy, Pikachu, the way the world of Pokemon works in general, and of course a top-tier contender for the most lovable villains of all time, Team Rocket. If you think this sounds awesome and would be an amazingly bold structure to go with for the second freaking episode of a series, you're right. It does sound awesome and would be an amazingly bold structure to go with for the second freaking episode. Too bad it wasn't able to follow through. Unfortunately, this thing's a hot mess, but it's not an irredeemable one, not by a long shot. Here, let me expand on the earlier summary. Ash's Pikachu is suffering severe trauma from the many pecks of multiple Spearow and exhausted from saving both him and Ash, as narrated here in a surprisingly calm tone by what appears to be Bob Ross.
Pikachu saved the day with its amazing Thundershock, but the electrifying encounter left Pikachu weak.
Now, at certain points I'd like to act out some scenes using my own interpretation of the characters, so to avoid the bots, I will instead enlist the help of these simulacrum that imply copyrighted characters but originate independently, or STICCBOIs. They have different names, so by anime lore, they are not the same. I don't make the rules here. Well, we did it, Kinkajou. What's wrong, buddy? Oh yeah, dying. Should probably stop walking dramatically and pick up the pace, huh? He then meets a policewoman, is accused of poaching, gets thrown through the doors of a Pokemon Center via Kaneda maneuver, gets encouraged and browbeaten in equal measure by both his mum and Professor Oak.
When my grandson Gary said that you wouldn't have a single new Pokemon by the time you got to Viridian City, I bet him $1 million that he'd be wrong.
And then gets thoroughly chewed out for stealing and destroying private property by the owner of said property before the center is hit by a balloon-bound poaching ring, who are then blown sky high by a newly recovered Pikachu, assisted by a pedal generator. Ash and Pikachu, accompanied by Misty, who still won't shut up about the bike, head towards Pewter City and Ash's first gym, but not before encountering a bug. Again, think about that plot. That isn't a coherent narrative. The best plots can be summed up in one succinct sentence. Farm boy gets caught up in intergalactic war. Newspaper mogul goes from humble beginnings to opulent tragedy. Man must fight internal demons to complete one last job before retirement. Girl commits manslaughter, teams up with locals to kill again. Although this story does have a through line in ostensibly following Ash, although it stops doing even that at a couple of points, it's just a bunch of events thrown together. It would be incredibly hard to sum up this episode in one sentence without leaving out a lot of other events that the plot seemed to find equally important. However, this would not be a bad thing if these events served a purpose in establishing a larger world and its inhabitants. Going back to the 22 short films episode of The Simpsons, what made it brilliant was how it helped us understand where these seemingly inconsequential characters were coming from and where they fit into this established world. It made the lore seem richer, and I believe that if it were well done, that kind of episode could do extremely well early on in the series to help us immerse ourselves in this fully functioning world. This episode, I believe, does not succeed in that, but it actually wasn't for lack of trying. There are some great world building moments here, including ones where we are told how trainers and their Pokemon are registered with the government, how there's a subsidized medical care in place that's established and respected enough that veterinary offices are the size of stadiums. We learn that video phones are commonplace, remember this is the 90s, and that although there are many futuristic aspects to this world, it's also well-worn and conservative in others. Where's the last place you've seen with a citywide PA system? There's also some intriguing character moments here too. I'm going to pull this from the trivia section, but did you know that until the last season of the series, this was the only time Ash's dad is ever mentioned?
It took your father 4 days to get there when he started Pokemon training. Oh, he'll be so proud.
And it's in Viridian City too. But seriously though, Ash is given even more to live up to here, and he has it hammered into him even more that he is very much not any kind of prodigy or even mediocre. He's well behind and he has someone to follow. This gives us great insight into his character and why he's so belligerent and bullheaded. He's trying to jump ahead. It helps that the voice acting on him is really good too. It's hard to remember sometimes due to it being a kids show and therefore a melodramatic reading is called for, but Veronica Taylor does an admirable job of showing his internal conflict in conversations like this.
Do you understand? Yes. And are you changing your underwear every day? Yes. Okay. Good night, son. I love you. Me too, Mom. Bye.
It's even more impressive when you consider that Ash and his mum are voiced by the same person. This actually leads me to our true introduction to Misty, who we saw cared about Pokemon a great deal in the last episode, but gets a lot more character thrown into her when she shows up with the husk of her old bike baying for Ash's blood.
Oh, I don't want any of your lame excuses, kid. I just want a new bike right now. My Pikachu's not too good. Huh? Is it very serious?
You see that total on-a-dime switch in mood? In lesser hands that could be unrealistic or even comical, but Rachel Lillis just sells it. 4Kids may have had some dubious practices, but if there's one thing they got right, it was getting the good voice actors. Which makes it all the more infuriating when the talent gets given awful, awful scenes like this.
I'll show you. Goldie, return.
She's all washed up.
You know as well as I do that a water Pokemon can't battle on land.
Apparently they know even more than you do because they didn't summon a water Pokemon on land for no reason. It's even worse when you consider that this was Misty's response to Ash choosing poor Pokemon to fight against them. Hey, how come their Pokemon was any better than mine? At least mine can actually fight. I wanted to show you just how ignorant you looked. Well, I must have looked pretty freaking ignorant. Shut up! The worst part is we find out later she has one of the most intimidating and unsettling Pokemon sitting in her bag, and it could fight out of water. It's so silly. Unfortunately, there are actually quite a few scenes like this throughout, and it just undercuts the potential so much.
She tells me you made it to the Pokemon Center in Viridian City. Is that correct?
I couldn't be talking to you if I wasn't here.
I dialed the Pokemon Center in Viridian City and you were able to answer.
Yeah, because that's where I am.
Professor, have you been taking your meds? What's my grandson's name again? The worst offender is probably Team Rocket, though. This is not the Team Rocket we know and love. They're almost completely distinct from their later characterizations, James even having a different voice. They're dreadfully boring, having no sense of humor apart from this one zinger.
The girl thinks she's pretty.
I think she's pretty too. Pretty pathetic.
And bizarrely, this means that the motto that all of us can recite from memory falls dreadfully flat. When they become their usual goofy selves later on, it makes sense that they'd put on this kind of production because they're just so theatrical, but here it just seems horrendously cheesy in the worst way. Of course, I'm willing to give all this a pass because I know they'll become comedy gold and incredibly sympathetic later on, but imagine if you didn't know that. It's a very weak start for any kind of nemesis. I will say this though, because I don't know where else I'll get a chance to mention it, but Jessie's hair is phenomenal. It is probably the example of something that looks great and even natural in an animated world, but looks ungodly hideous in real life. More so, I think, than any other anime hairdo, and that deserves respect. Also, it makes her hair look like the R logo, and I didn't get that until I was in my 20s. It's weird how that can happen. So yes, although there were a lot of infuriating things about this episode...
You couldn't have seen this Pokemon.
How could you see that? Do you have access to all the security cameras? Are you Big Brother? For the positives I mentioned before, it's still not bad at all. It still did a great job of acclimatizing us further to the world these characters live in. It still does a great job of showing us that Ash has a lot to overcome and more reasons to root for him, and it certainly never bugged me to the point of wanting to switch it off. I'll give it a great ball. Trivia. Today's trivia was mainly picked from the ripe fields of Bulbapedia and the artisan comparison hydroponics of Dokasu's backpack. They have even more facts about each individual episode on their respective websites. Links are in the description. If you sign up to their Bulba Premium service with the code SUEDE, you live in a parallel universe in which I'm sponsored by them and they have a premium membership. But yeah, this mural on the wall in the Pokemon Center is interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it has a hidden video phone behind it, Batman style. Seriously, what's up with that? Do all professors have an emergency hotline? And even then, why don't they use the regular phone? But it also depicts the 3 legendary birds of Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. And Arcanine. It's funny because in the game, Arcanine is put in the legendary category of Pokemon, even though it's not classed as such. There have been rumors that Arcanine was originally going to be a legendary in Red and Blue, and this certainly lends credence to that. I also like that Ash mistakes Articuno for the Ho-Oh that he saw at the end of the last episode. It's vague enough that you can see how he'd make that mistake, and Oak could still comment on how rare it is. I feel like I have to mention that the Pidgey Cuckoo scene here is green rather than regular Pidgey colors, but I wouldn't actually call this a mistake, as there are a lot of products in this world with discolored animals. For some reason, Ash's line here is changed in the recap from what it was in the original episode, even though it's the same length. That's really weird.
And I hereby declare to the Pokemon of the world, I will be a Pokemon master. I declare to the Pokemon of the world, I will be the greatest Pokemon trainer of all time!
And there was a strange bit of localization occurring here, where 4Kids began its insidious practice of Americanizing food products. In the Japanese, Ash asks Professor Oak if he's cooking ramen noodles, which is what flusters him and causes him to change the camera. At the end, he also shouts that his ramen is boiling over rather than getting the pizza. The funny thing is, you can actually see the ramen cooking right here. Noodles on a pizza, now there's an idea. Lastly, at one point in the Japanese version, Ash's mom says that a brown hen lays white eggs and a sparrow lays Pidgey eggs. This means that in the early stages of the show, Pokemon did indeed live alongside regular animals, and this was just phased out rather than being boo-boos in the writer or animator's part. Who's that Patreon? It's Caitlin McCaffrey! They ask, is there anything you think that should be a Pokemon that isn't one yet? I still can't believe how many Australian and New Zealand animals haven't been Pokemonified. I mean, of course I take particular umbrage at this as a New Zealand native myself, but look at the Kiwi! This super fast soft toy that could take up the Rattata slot since it literally evolved to fill the niche of a rat-like animal in a non-rat environment. Then there's the Piwakawaka, which is basically an adorable living cotton ball which almost literally has a third wing due to its proportionally massive tail. The Kiruru, with its massive chonk and colouring that makes it look like an Italian dad with a white tank top. The Pukeko, the Spoonbill, the Tui, these all look like Pokemon. It's even worse when you consider the extinct animals we have as well, like the Huia, which had different beaks depending on the sex, tailor-made for Pokemon. Not to mention the Moa, which reached 3.6 meters or 12 feet tall, or the freaking Haast's eagle that was so massive it was known to hunt said Moa and could easily have carried off children. There's also all those Aussie animals that haven't been made into Pokemon yet, like, sure, we got a koala, but no echidna, no lyrebird, and most bizarre of all, still no platypus Pokemon. But I can give that a pass because it's Australia and no one cares about Australia. But yes, let's move on from Viridian and onwards towards Ash's first Pokemon gym, which is weird because Viridian City has a gym. You'd think they'd at least establish it was closed or something. But one thing's for sure on the road ahead, there are going to be plenty more things that bug me.
Extra special thanks to Brandon K, Calvin Atkinson, John G. Robertson, Jonathan Johnson, Matt Storrs, Marie Spear, Mystic Samurai 1983, The Dark Master, Trey McGowan, Winters King, and Wolf Raptor.